An empty suitcase beside a body, yet it carried more weight than gold. Welcome to Fogged Clue. I'm your host, Merrin. Comment your location. I love seeing where you all tune in from. Let's dive in. It was a grey Wednesday morning, the sort that made the cobblestones of the boulevard Richard-Lenoir look as if they had been polished with old rain. From his desk in the corner office, Maigret could see the bare branches in the little park opposite swaying in a slow, almost reluctant breeze. The stove in the corner rattled faintly, though it had been fed generously with coal an hour ago. His pipe sat in its dish, extinguished, not because he had forgotten it, but because there was nothing in particular to do and no real reason to keep it going. Janine, the cleaning woman, had just passed through with her bucket, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum. She had paused to tell him that the cafe on the corner was closed this morning, shutters down. The owner, she said, had gone to visit his sister in Rouen. She told him this as though it might be important. To her, perhaps it was. Maigret only nodded and gave a faint smile. On the desk lay a half-finished note from his wife. Lunch will be ready at 12. Do try to be on time. We have the veal from yesterday. He imagined her in the kitchen, flour on her hands, the big blue pot simmering slowly. It was a comforting image, and yet, as he leaned back in his chair, a vague restlessness pressed against him. The telephone rang once, sharp and ordinary. Not urgent, not shrill. He picked it up, expecting a colleague or a report from the Quai des Orfèvres. Instead, the voice on the other end belonged to a sergeant from the Gare du Nord precinct. Flat, almost apologetic, he explained, "There's a matter here, Chief Inspector." A man found in the alley behind Rue de Dunkerque, not far from the station. No identification except, well, an empty suitcase beside him. Looks like he's been there since the night. Maigret asked no immediate questions. He let the man speak until there was nothing more. An empty suitcase. Such a banal object, but the way the sergeant mentioned it, with a faint hitch in his voice, left a residue in Maigret's mind. Why had it been empty? Why not taken? Why mentioned at all unless it felt strange to the one who'd found it? Outside, a tram clanged along the rails, splashing through a shallow puddle. Maigret reached for his overcoat, the heavy one, and the old felt hat that had seen more rain than sunshine. He checked the clock. 9:47. If he walked slowly, he could take the long route along the canal, past the barges moored in the morning stillness, and let the case, whatever it might be, begin to take shape in his mind. It was not yet an official investigation. For now, it was only a man, a suitcase, and the faint tug in Maigret's chest that told him something about the scene would not rest easy until he had seen it with his own eyes. He did not take the tram. The morning had the sort of humidity that seemed to soften even the iron railings along the canal, and he preferred the slow rhythm of his own steps. The sky kept changing its mind, lifting a shade and then dropping it again, and the barges lay motionless, except where a man on one of them stooped to swab a deck with a grey mop. A child's laugh bounced off the water and then was absorbed by the damp. As he crossed a narrow bridge, Maigret's mind turned, not toward clues, not yet, but toward the shape of the thing. A man and an empty suitcase. People traveled with full ones to become someone else in another place. They came back with empty ones when they had failed. Or was the emptiness a performance, a statement, the way a woman might powder her face too soon in order to look composed? He was thinking of that when he reached the Rue de Dunkerque. The station spilled its breath into the streets nearby, a draught of stale heat and coal, pastry, and the faint ammoniac smell from the urinals. The alley the sergeant had mentioned lay behind a row of shuttered delivery doors, a channel for trash bins and cats. A uniformed constable stood at the entrance with hands pressed to his belt as if holding himself in. He straightened when he recognized the large man in the heavy coat. "Chief Inspector," he said, sounding relieved, as though something unnameable had been hovering and would now depart. Maigret nodded. Sergeant? Further in. The alley was slick, not from a downpour, but from a night-long mist that had never quite condensed into rain. It made the cobbles look varnished. A dray wagon had reversed here recently. The curved tracks of its tires were still printed in damp grit. Halfway down, two men in plain clothes and a corporal in a cap stood in a loose ring around something under a dark cloth. The smell was not yet strong. Death hadn't had time to settle its affairs with the body. Someone had chalked a circle around the empty suitcase and another around a scuffed patch of wall. It made the place look like a classroom where a lazy teacher had set his problems and gone out for a smoke. The sergeant who had phoned, small with a pretensive mustache, stepped forward. "Chief Inspector." "Darnoux," he said, snapping his heels together a little. "Found at 7:25 by a ragman, one Goujon, who brings bottles to the cafe around the corner. He said he nearly tripped. The suitcase was already open. There's nothing in it." He gestured as if to show the emptiness again. After all, it was their principal exhibit. He bent, flicked back the cloth. The man on the cobbles had the pallor of someone who'd recently been running a temperature, or perhaps he'd always been that kind of pale. Straw color in the beard stubble, lips slightly parted. Close to 50, maybe more. The coat was a decent tweed that tried to look more expensive than it was. The collar, when Maigret leaned in, showed a faint laundry stamp, numbers smudged, like a date that had been wiped. The nails were trimmed, squared by a careful hand, but there was a deep crease across the index finger of the right hand, exactly where a pen presses for years and leaves its secret brand. The shoes were polished well, but the soles were worn at the heel on the outside, a man who walked with his feet slightly turned, patient, unhurried, unwilling to waste leather by dragging his toes. "What do we have?" Maigret asked softly, though he suspected there was little to have. "Bruise at the back of the head," Darnoux said, "at the base. No blood on the cobbles. He might have been moved, or he fell somewhere else and crawled. There's a little scuffing on the wall." He pointed. "No wallet. Handkerchief. A few coins. Metro ticket from last night. Barbès," he added, as if that might matter. "No watch. No wedding ring either," the corporal said, eager to contribute. "Or it was taken," Darnoux added, as if to balance things. Maigret touched the cloth of the trousers, a cheap wool, a bit shiny at the seat. A man who sat a great deal, but not in a plush chair. There was a scent, faint and not unpleasant, that clung to the coat. Not cologne. Soap, perhaps, the hard yellow kind that laundries use. And something else. Oranges. He glanced at the suitcase. It was a modest brown valise with a crack beginning at the hinge. The handle was darkened with sweat and time. Inside, nothing but the lining, which had given way in a ladder of tears along one edge. He ran his fingers lightly there and felt a fragment of thread, finer than the rest, as if the lining had been restitched by someone without the proper needle. In the corner, embedded in the seam, a grain of something pale. He lifted it to his nose. Flour, or dust from plaster? He couldn't say. "Who's been here?" he asked. "The ragman," Darnoux said. "The cafe's delivery boy, who saw the ragman shouting. Two women from the building yonder, curtains twitching. One says she heard a thump around midnight. But it's a street next to the station, Chief Inspector. It's always full of thumps." "And the station?" "Nothing yet. We sent a man to ask at the cloakroom, see if anyone remembers a suitcase like this going out. It's the sort you see by the dozen. No offense." A cat appeared behind a trash bin, surveyed them all with slow contempt, and withdrew. A gust of air carried with it the smell of coffee from somewhere nearby and the faintest layer of pastry sugar. It made the morning feel indecent. "Cover him," Maigret said. He straightened, took in the alley from the station end to the street beyond. It was a short run between. If you'd been followed and you were not a man used to running, you might choose the alley for a shortcut and find it was a trap. "Who shut the suitcase?" he asked. "It was open when we arrived. Still open," the corporal said. "We didn't touch." A door opened to their left, a metal one with paint peeling in scales, and a man in an apron poked his head out. He had flour on his hands, up his wrists, even on his cheekbone, a pale smear like the mark of a thumb. "I heard police," he said, eyes keen. "I have deliveries. If you're going to keep this blocked—" "We won't," Maigret said. He looked at the flour. "You work nights." "Bread before light," the man said with a half-smile that wasn't unkind. "The dough doesn't rise faster for the police." "What happened?" "Tell me what you saw at 2 o'clock, Maigret said, as if it were a detail they had already agreed upon. The man blinked, then shrugged. "At 2 I was kneading. I take a smoke at 1:30. I stood at the door. It was misting. There was a man who passed with a suitcase, I think that one." He nodded toward the valise without stepping closer. "He did not walk like the others who hurried to the last train. He walked like someone who doesn't want to arrive anywhere." "Do you know what I mean?" "I might," Maigret said. "Did anyone follow?" "Not then. Later I heard a bottle roll. You know how it is. A clink, something like that. A noise against the wall. I thought it was one of those boys who drink behind the bins. But I did not come out. I had loaves in." "Would you know the man again?" "He had a face like unbaked bread," the baker said, intentionally or not. He grimaced at his own words, then softened. Not young, not old. He held the suitcase by both hands, as if it were heavy even when it was light. "Thank you." Maigret took his name. The man wiped his palms on his apron, leaving clearer patches among the flour, and retreated. From the street end, a woman in a headscarf watched them from a first-floor window with a cloth in her hands. She was pretending to wipe the frame, but she had stopped moving. When she saw Maigret looking, she resumed the slow rubbing, eyes lowering as if ashamed to have been caught at nothing. "Bring the ragman," Maigret said, "and we'll have a word at the cafe." The cafe on the corner had its shutters half up now, making a grin of wood slats. A girl of perhaps 20 stood behind the zinc counter, her hair pulled back and the skin under her eyes puffy in the way that comes from waking too early. She set out cups and saucers with the economy of someone who has done it in her sleep. The coffee maker hissed and steam curled under the ceiling. "You're open?" Maigret asked, removing his hat. "We open," she said, with the stubborn pride of the poor. "Even when we're closed." He nodded. "A man came last night with a suitcase." Her eyes flicked to the door, to the street, and back to him. It was not fear, it was calculation. She saw authority and weighed the benefit of pleasing it against the trouble of involvement. "I see men with suitcases," she said. "It's a station." "True," Maigret agreed, taking a stool. "Was it heavy or light?" "How to know?" A trace of a smile. He did not let it down. "But you looked at his shoes," he said. "You always look at shoes." She blinked. "Why would I do that?" "Because if a man's shoes are shiny and his socks are thin, he's overdue on his rent and is hunting for dignity and polish. And if his shoes are dusty with plaster, he's on a job. And if they're sticky, he's been to the markets. You look at shoes because they tell you when a man will tip and when he will pretend not to notice his change is short. You're a practical girl." The smile came again, more ready. "His shoes were shiny," she admitted, "but the laces weren't new. It's how you can tell. People change laces only when they break." She set a cup in front of him without asking. He had a cough, just a little behind the breath. He asked for water. Not coffee. Water. At midnight, the water came, and with it the faint reflection of his face in the surface of the glass, as if a second Maigret were peering up at him from a well. "Did he meet anyone?" "He sat. He didn't drink. He looked at the door whenever it opened, and when no one came, he looked at the clock." We have a bad clock, she added with a perfunctory frown. It's fast. He left when it said 10 past, but it was just after the hour. Did he pay? He left 2 coins for water, she said, faintly offended, as if he didn't want to owe even us. And before he left, he put his hand on the suitcase like he was afraid it would go without him. The ragman arrived then, led by the corporal who had to half-march to keep up with the old man's irregular stride. He was not yet old in years, perhaps, but wine and weather had bent him into the shape of a question mark. He carried a blessed air of self-pity and importance. Today, he was the one who had found the body. "I nearly broke my foot," he said at once, to establish grievance. "Imagine, at my age, falling over a dead man." Maigret let him talk himself empty. The hour he rose, the route he took, the state of his cart's wheel that wobbled, and so made the bottles chime like a little church. He described the alley as if he had invented it. Under the flow of words, there were facts. The suitcase had been set, not thrown. The body lay with the head at a particular angle, as if someone had guided rather than dropped. And there was this. He smelled like oranges, the ragman said unexpectedly. Not like fruit, not sweet. Like when they cleaned the floors at the big house on Rue Lafayette, with the peel in the bucket. The girl at the counter looked inward, as if that detail solved a small riddle for her. She picked up a cloth and wiped the same spot twice. "You found him at 7:25, Maigret said. "What did you do then?" "I shouted," the man said indignantly. "No one wants to be the first to touch a dead man. The young ones think they'll catch something. Me, I know there's nothing to catch but trouble." He had the look of someone who was retelling the story in order to own it. Maigret did not mind. Stories told themselves, and when they did, they sometimes left a corner unguarded. He paid for his coffee, leaving too much, and told the girl to keep it. She inclined her head, pleased and a little embarrassed, and put the coins into a jar that had once held olives. On his way out, he paused at the door, watching the foot traffic adjust itself to the day. A porter from the station hurried by with a trolley, metal clacking, and a woman in a brown coat walked defensively, chin tucked, clutching a handbag too tightly. "Chief Inspector," Darnoux said, catching up to him with a paper in his hand. "From the laundry mark, we think it's Rue de Rochechouart, a small place, Madame Lilette's. She marks by date. That smudge might be the 14th. "Today is Wednesday," Maigret said. 14th was Saturday. "Yes, Chief Inspector. A man collects his laundry on Saturday. He has his shirts clean for Sunday. He comes to the station Monday or Tuesday, perhaps to meet someone, perhaps to leave. He is found Wednesday, and somewhere between Saturday and Wednesday, his suitcase becomes empty." Darnoux waited. He had that look, too, of a younger man eager to read a verdict before the judge had finished blinking. "We'll speak to Madame Lilette," Maigret said, "and we'll ask at the cloakroom, but not for the suitcase. For a parcel that smells faintly of orange peel. Or for a complaint about a man who wanted to leave a suitcase with nothing in it." "Why would that matter?" Darnoux asked, not impudent, just genuinely puzzled. "Because people are not good at carrying emptiness," Maigret said. "They want to put something in it, even if it is only a lie." He looked up. A fine rain had begun to punctuate the air, barely visible, almost the idea of rain rather than the thing itself. His coat would drink it readily. His hat would hold it. He thought briefly of the veal in the blue pot and the note on his desk. He adjusted his collar and moved toward the station, not quickly and not slowly either, which is to say, in the manner of a man who intends to arrive exactly when the answer presents itself. The Rue de Rochechouart was only a short tram ride from the station, and the rain had thickened just enough to slick the pavements and send a thin stream along the gutter. Maigret preferred to walk the last few streets. He liked to arrive at a place on foot. The rhythm of it allowed the neighborhood to introduce itself. Here, the buildings leaned slightly forward, as if to listen to one another, their facades dulled by years of soot and damp. There was a smell of cabbage drifting from an upstairs window, and somewhere a wireless was playing a faint, tinny waltz. Madame Lilette's laundry was halfway. Down the street, its window steamed over from inside, the glass mottled with drops. A small bell announced him when he pushed the door, and a wave of warm, wet air wrapped around him, carrying the scents of soap, starch, and damp cloth. Behind a counter, a woman of about 60 looked up from a basket of folded shirts. She had a strong face, the sort of face that could greet a client warmly or fend off a tax collector without changing expression. "Yes?" she asked, not unfriendly, but with the guarded tone of someone used to men in uniform turning up without warning. Maigret removed his hat and shook off the rain. "Madame Lilette, I'm Chief Inspector Maigret." He waited for the name to land. It did. Her eyes shifted, and something behind them tightened. "I have no trouble here," she said, already on the defensive. "I'm sure you don't." He stepped closer, his voice low. A man, middle-aged, tweed coat, laundry picked up on Saturday, laundry mark with the number 14. She didn't answer right away, but her hands continued folding, smoothing the cloth as though it were a breathing thing. "I know him," she said finally. "Not by name. He comes every 2 weeks, regular as the post, always the same. 2 shirts, 1 pair of trousers, sometimes a tie. Pays cash. Polite but not talkative. He never tries to, make friends." "Where does he live?" She pursed her lips. "I don't ask. He's not from here. His clothes, good quality once, but tired now. A man living on what's left, I think. But he was proud, always straight-backed when he came in. On Saturday he was different." Maigret watched her closely. "Different how?" "Distracted. He checked the clock twice while I was wrapping his bundle, and this is nothing, but he asked if I knew where one could find a locksmith nearby. Not for a house," he said. "For a case." Maigret's gaze shifted slightly toward the counter where a row of parcels sat waiting for collection. "A suitcase?" She gave a small shrug. "Perhaps." He didn't say. She wiped her palms on her apron, leaving darker patches. "I told him there's one on Rue de Maubeuge, but they're expensive." He said thank you and left. That was all. "Did he mention meeting anyone?" "Number, but he looked expectant, like someone who hears a train before anyone else does." Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist again, and Maigret lingered under the laundry's striped awning, watching water trail from the edge in a steady line. Darnoux, who had waited on the opposite corner under the dripping brim of his hat, crossed over. "Well?" he asked. "He was looking for a locksmith," Maigret said. "For a case, possibly the suitcase. He might have wanted it opened or locked, and if it was locked, he was carrying something he didn't want others to see." They started toward Rue de Maubeuge, the pavement shining like wet slate. The locksmith's shop was narrow, its window crowded with keys, locks, and little handwritten signs in faded ink. Inside, the smell of metal filings and oil hung in the air. A man in a brown waistcoat, sleeves rolled to the elbow, looked up from a bench where he was filing a key. "Morning," he said. His eyes moved from Maigret's face to Darnoux's, then back, assessing without fear. "Police?" Maigret nodded. "Saturday. A man with a brown suitcase. Medium build, tweed coat." "Did he come here?" The locksmith squinted, tapping the file against his palm. "I remember him. Came in mid-afternoon. Wanted a lock changed on his case. Said the old one was no good. Too easy to force. I told him I could fit a new clasp, but it'd leave marks. He didn't care. Paid in cash. No haggling." "Was the case empty?" The locksmith's eyebrows rose. "How would I know? He kept it closed the whole time. Heavy enough, though. He carried it like it wasn't something to swing about. He waited while I did the work. 15 minutes. Said it was important." "Did he mention why?" "He didn't, but when he left, he looked around before stepping out, like a man checking the street for someone. I thought maybe a creditor." From the doorway, Maigret could see the reflection of the locksmith's window in the wet pavement, the hanging keys forming a kind of curtain over the dim street beyond. "If he wanted it locked," he said slowly, "then whatever was inside was worth protecting, and now it's gone." They stepped back into the street, and the noise from the station's direction reached them faintly. The muffled clang of a trolley, the hiss of brakes. Back at the Gare du Nord, Maigret did not go first to the cloakroom. Instead, he stood in the main hall where travelers passed under the high roof, their footsteps merging into a restless hum. His eyes moved from face to face, not looking for the man. He was beyond finding now, but for the type. Someone who lingered instead of hurrying, someone whose attention was not on the departures board, but on the arrivals. Darnoux returned from the cloakroom with a note. "They remember him," he said. "Tuesday night. He came to ask about leaving a case, but when they told him there'd be a fee per day, he hesitated, said he might come back. He didn't. So he carried it with him," Maigret murmured, "even to the café, and emptied it somewhere between then and when he died," Darnoux added, "or had it emptied for him." The porter who had spoken to the cloakroom clerk was summoned. A big man with shoulders like a wardrobe, he shifted from one foot to the other as Maigret asked his questions. The man seemed nervous, the porter said. He asked where the side exits were, not the main ones. Said he had an appointment near Rue de Dunkerque. The image was becoming sharper, the man with the locked suitcase, guarding it through the streets, unwilling to leave it behind. Then, perhaps meeting someone. And later, the suitcase empty beside him in the alley. Maigret's gaze drifted upward toward the great station clock, its hands slow and certain. "We'll find out who he was. People like that. They don't disappear without leaving someone who notices." He had Darnoux send word to every lodging house within a kilometre of the station, asking after a man fitting the description. Then, with his coat collar turned against the damp, he walked the short distance back to the cafe on the corner of the alley. The girl behind the counter looked up in surprise. "You remembered something," Maigret said before she could speak. She hesitated, biting her lip. "When he left, he turned the wrong way," she said finally. "Not toward the main street, but toward the alley. I thought maybe he knew a shortcut, but when I looked after him, there was another man at the corner, just standing. He was lighting a cigarette, but he didn't smoke it. He dropped it and followed." Maigret's eyes narrowed slightly. "Could you describe him?" she thought. "Taller than the first man. Dark coat, maybe black. Hat pulled low. I didn't see his face well, but his walk was different, like he was sure the man with the suitcase wouldn't notice him until he wanted him to." The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving the air smelling of wet stone. Maigret stood for a long moment, his pipe between his fingers, unlit. The image in his mind was clear. The two figures vanishing into the narrow passage, the sound of footsteps swallowed by the mist. "Darnoux," he said quietly when they were outside again, "we'll need to find that man. And if he's the one who emptied the suitcase, then," Maigret said, starting back toward the alley, "we'll see if he is any better at carrying a lie than our friend was at carrying emptiness." The alley had loosened its damp grip on the morning. The mist was now only a memory clinging to the crevices of the brick. Cats had reclaimed their kingdom in small, unhurried inspections. Maigret returned there not out of hope for new evidence, but because places, like people, sometimes altered their posture between 1 hour and the next. The rag man had gone. The corporal had gone. The girl at the cafe had polished the same corner of zinc twice more, and now had moved on to sweeping. Only the alley kept its 2 chalk circles, which looked already embarrassed by their own insistence. He stood where the baker would stand when he smoked, shoulder leaned into the cool metal of the delivery door. He did not light his pipe. He watched the stretch from the cafe corner to the scuffed wall and tried, without effort, to let his thoughts move at the speed of the night before. With one foot He nudged at a dark fleck near the edge of the paving. It crumbled under the sole and left a smudge like charcoal. He crouched and then, with an awkwardness that did not suit his size, pinched up what remained. Tobacco. A butt, with paper twisted poorly, not like a man who habitually rolls his own. The tobacco was harsh, the kind sold in little flat packets at newsstands, caporal, strong and cheap. There was the ghost of sulphur from a match. Nearby, he bent again, a second butt, crushed straight down, as if the smoker had no habit, only the act of lighting and discarding. He held them a moment. The girl had said the man at the corner lit a cigarette and did not smoke it. Some men used fire the way others used a cough, to appear at ease. He slipped both butts into a small envelope and put it in his pocket without ceremony. From the first-floor window across the alley, the woman with the cloth had reappeared. This time, she did not pretend to wipe. Her elbows rested on the sill, the cloth hung like a truce flag from one hand. She followed him with her eyes as if he were a piece of street furniture that had, inexplicably, begun to move. He looked up. "Madame," he said mildly. She flinched at being addressed, then leaned a fraction farther, lowering her voice, though it would not have carried beyond him in any case. "I didn't say everything earlier," she said, eyes skittering to the left and right as if the bricks might testify against her. "The young one," she meant the corporal. He asked if I heard a thump. I said yes. There was more than a thump. What was there? Voices. Not shouting. Men who don't want anyone to hear them never shout. The first one, he had a cough. I hear coughs. I wash stairs. I know the coughs in this building like lullabies. This was a timid cough. The other had a step that didn't belong to her. We know our steps. He put his heel down hard, then the rest of the foot. Like a soldier who has learned not to look like a soldier. What did they say? She drew her lips in, thinking. I heard pas à la consigne. Not the cloakroom, and something like discret. Then the sound. She touched her own head, the back of it, with 2 fingers. And a bottle rolled, but that was the ragman later. Did you look? I'm not a fool, she said, and her mouth softened. Not in apology, but in self-respect. My husband is dead 10 years. I have no taste for strangers in alleys. But after, I looked, yes. I saw the suitcase. It was open and then it was shut. By whom? She shook her head. If I had seen that, I would have said. I only saw the lid was different. When a lid is open, the street is taller, do you see? It cut the corner off. He nodded his thanks. She seemed relieved to have fastened her bit of truth onto someone who would not waste it. When he came out to the street again, the station breathed its steady breath. Darnoux joined him with an awkward half-trot, as if trying to match a gait he had not learned. Calls to the lodging houses, he said. We have 2 possibles. Hôtel de Flandre on the Boulevard Magenta. Concierge says a man of that description has not been seen. Since Monday night, paid cash, no luggage left behind. And a small boarding house on Rue Philippe de Girard. A Madame Roussel, who says one of her gentlemen did not sleep in his bed last night. We'll visit Madame Roussel now, Maigret said. Rue Philippe de Girard nudged up toward the tracks where the city sheds pretense and shows its scaffolding. Laundry hung limp and grey as old surrender flags. Madame Roussel's sign was hand-painted on glass, with loops that had been ambitious at the start and hasty at the end. The hallway smelled of damp paste and boiled onions. A ceramic dog, broken at one ear, guarded the umbrella stand. Madame Roussel herself had a bosom like a barricade and a face eager for complicity. She had already made tea for the police in her mind and in her kettle. It isn't that I want trouble, she told them before they had asked a question. But with the war years and the shortages, we learned it's better to speak. He is polite, my Monsieur Martin, but politeness doesn't make a bed look slept in. Monsieur Martin, Maigret said, trying the name on his tongue as if he were testing a coin. That's the name he gave me. Perhaps it's not his baptism, but his shirts, Good cotton, tired now. He said he had a wife once who pressed them like glass. He pays on time every Friday, even when he is not here. He doesn't drink in the house. He takes a little glass at the cafe and brings me stamps if he sees I need them. But last night he did not come. His room is on the second floor. She led them creaking up, pressing one hand to the curve of her hip in the way of women who know precisely how many steps there are and when each one began to complain. The room had the neutral smell of places that don't belong to anyone, with a thread of something else beneath it. Citrus. Faint, not sweet. Orange peel, Madame Roussel said, catching his glance, pleased to be one step ahead. I put it in the wash-water sometimes. It stops rooms from thinking they are cellars. She pushed the window a little, and the sash made a noise like a man clearing his throat. He keeps his things tidy. Look, on the small table beside the narrow bed was an ink bottle with a cork stopped not quite evenly, a pen with a nib sharpened down by use, and a sheet of paper. It had 2 lines in a careful hand. Madame, and under it, I will bring the rest as agreed. It would be better near the station. Please, no names in the cafe. There was no signature. The envelope beside it was addressed, but the ink had run in a droplet where a hand had hesitated. May I? Maigret asked, though he did not wait. He held the paper to the light and then to his nose. There was the clean iron scent of ink, and beneath it a trace of the same orange. On the chair was a coat folded too neatly for a man in a hurry. He checked the inside of the collar. No tailor's name. The trousers hung from a peg, the pockets turned out just enough to show politeness, in front of the charwoman. Any visitors? He asked. Sunday last, a gentleman came. Taller than Monsieur Martin. Clean shoes. No mud. He wore a dark hat that didn't suit his head. Some men's hats wear them, not the other way. I didn't like his eyes. He smiled, but not with the part that thinks. He asked for Monsieur Martin, and when I said my tenants received downstairs, he said they were old friends, used to seeing each other in rooms not made for guests. Is that a thing to say? Her indignation had been saved and now retrieved with pleasure. They went out. When Monsieur Martin returned, he had that suitcase he sometimes has. Sometimes? Not always. He is not a traveling man. He used to be a clerk for a firm that closed. He told me, but on Sundays lately, he had the case, and he would not let me take it for him when I offered. A gentleman allows a woman to lift it if it is empty. He did not. You say he was once a clerk, Maigret said. Where? She lifted a shoulder. He didn't boast. Somewhere near Barbès. He said the letters M and S, I think. There are many letters. On the mantel, propping up a hanging mirror that made anyone in it look a little shorter and a little wider, was yesterday's newspaper with a column circled in pencil. The headline was an advertisement. Purchases. Old letters, documents, diaries, private papers. Discretion assured. Best prices. A Rue Lafayette address was listed, and a time, evenings by appointment. Did you mark this? Maigret asked. She reddened as if she had been caught in an immodesty. I clear the papers for kindling, yes, but that circle is not mine. Thank you, he said. He meant it. She would tell this story later to neighbors, and the thank you would make the telling sweeter, which in turn would make it travel faster and truer. Back on the street, the tracks hummed with a passing train. The air had a slight taste of rust. A buyer of letters, Darnoux said, as if testing the phrase for drama and finding it disappointingly ordinary. Everyone buys letters, Maigret said. Some with money, some with looks. Men who are lonely buy the right to think a life was written for them. It makes them feel less like a blank page. He started toward Boulevard de Magenta. We'll see the Hôtel de Flandre, then Rue Lafayette. At the Hôtel de Flandre, the concierge was a man with a face designed to keep keys and secrets. He had the precise formality of someone who insists on being called by his full name, even by his wife. Yes, "A man as you describe," he said. "Registered as Jules Martin, though that is a name that pays by the day. He took a room Monday and did not sleep in it. He sat in the lobby for an hour around 8, reading the notices. He left with a suitcase. He asked me whether there was a side door to return by. I told him not for guests." "Did he receive anyone?" "A phone call," the man said. "Please to add something of weight. For him. Unusual. Our guests are not often called. He said yes twice, and once he said near the station. Then he went out." "Did he leave anything?" The concierge considered. "He left a smell," he said with finicky distaste. "Orange, like women's sweets, but not sweet. It clung to the chair as if it had hands." They went there, to the chair, a leather seat cracked into a map of tiny islands. Maigret pressed his big hand to the armrest and then lifted it, as if the ghost of the scent might have fingerprints. People of a certain sort were loyal to certain cleaners. Shops on Rue Lafayette used orange oil to wipe their counters so that even the paper took it with them. "Rue Lafayette," he said. The advertisement in the paper. A buyer who promises discretion, and a man who used to be a clerk nearby who now carries a locked suitcase and does not use the cloakroom. A porter crossed the lobby, dragging a mat that sighed against the floor. Outside, a tram bell dinged twice, impatient with a woman who had stepped into the street with her basket at the wrong moment. "Do you think the suitcase had letters?" Darnoux asked. He was awed by the idea, in a way that murder had not awed him. A suitcase full of words. "It had something that could be exchanged for money," Maigret said. "Letters make money when they are written by the wrong people, or by people at the wrong time. A man with pride keeps such letters until he does not. Then he brings them near a station, because train stations are places where people forgive themselves for being someone else." They crossed toward Rue Lafayette at a pace that did not hurry, because hurrying is another kind of announcement. On the way, they passed the locksmith again. He looked up and lifted his chin in a salute that suggested he had already recounted his part to 2 customers and was ready for a third. A wet parcel sat on his counter, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string that bit the corners. It smelled faintly of citrus. "Delivery for the shop next door," he said, noticing Maigret's glance. "They clean with peel. I hate it. It makes everything seem cleaner than it is." The shop next door was a dealer in books, engravings, and any paper that had learned to keep a secret. The window displayed maps of places that had changed their borders so often that even the rivers were unsure where to go. A small placard in the corner, hand-lettered with a certain pretension, offered archives, correspondences, diaries purchased with discretion, evening appointments by arrangement. Inside, a man with hair arranged like a careful nest looked up as the bell answered for them. He wore a tie that had known better days and a smile that proposed neutrality. "We buy and sell memories," he said as if delivering his motto, "so that they do not yellow too quickly." Maigret set his hat on the counter. He let the man look at him until the smile tired. "Monday, evening," Maigret said. "Or Tuesday." A man with a brown suitcase. "Tweed coat, hands that have written more than they have lifted. You made an appointment with him." The bookseller's eyes moved once to the door and back. He rearranged the corners of his mouth, which had nowhere to go. "Perhaps," he said. "We have many clients." "You have few," Maigret said, and inclined his head toward the dust on the unused chairs. "He is dead." The word did what words sometimes do. It made the room smaller. The man's hand went briefly to the knot of his tie, not to adjust it, but as if it had tugged him. "We talk in the evening," the bookseller said after a moment. "We do not talk in the morning." "We will talk now," Maigret said, almost gently. He did not raise his voice. He had never found it necessary. "What did he bring?" "Not coin, not bonds. Paper with pain attached to it." The man breathed in. The citrus scent came stronger, as if the very walls exhaled it in their defense. "He came Monday," he said finally. "He showed me 3 letters only, to prove the kind. Good paper, old ink, careful hand. A lady. The name is nothing to you." He lied with a little practice. He said there were more. He wanted more than I would give. We agreed to meet last night for the rest, near the station, with no names. "And you sent someone," Maigret said. He did not make it a question. Taller. Hat that did not suit him. A man who lights cigarettes and does not smoke. The bookseller's hand left his tie and found the counter, where it made a small, flat noise. "I do not go into alleys," he said with a sincerity that came from bone. "I sent my assistant. He came back with nothing. He said the man kept the case closed. He said the man wanted cash for all at once. He said he would fetch me if the man agreed to be reasonable. But then he could not find him. That is what he said. And what did he not say?" The man looked tired suddenly, as if the room had taken back the light it had lent him. "He did not say where the blood came from on the corner of his handkerchief," he said softly. "I noticed it only when I was folding it for him. He is clumsy. He cuts himself on paper. That is what he tells me." Maigret put his hat back on. He could feel, as one feels a draught, the path of the day ahead. Toward the assistant with the bad hat. Toward the woman whose letters had become merchandise. Toward the rooms where pride turned into need and back again. "Give me his name," he said, "and do not fret about your business. We all sell what we can bear to part with." He paused. "Some of us sell what we cannot." Outside, the sky had made up its mind only on one point. It would not be blue. The station clock showed a minute that might have been yesterday's. On the pavement, a line of orange peel lay near the gutter, bright as an idea no one wanted to own. The bookseller's pen scratched out the name with a reluctance that made it unnecessary to check his handwriting for truth. André Furet, Passage Verdot, afternoons usually at the shop, mornings sometimes at the reading room of the Musée Carnavalet, to educate himself. The bookseller did not try to make himself look innocent. Innocence is a costume that fits poorly on men whose trade is discretion. On the boulevard, traffic had thickened into that resigned midday tide that moves because it always has. Maigret checked the clock in the arcade and thought of the blue pot on his stove at home, the veal that would be at its forgiving point. He could have sent Darnoux alone to Passage Verdot. Instead, he turned his steps toward the quay, then across the Pont Saint-Michel and up the quieter street where his bell was known to Madame Maigret's hand. She had set the table for 2, not fussing because she never did, and the scent of the veal was the kind that made a man's shoulders drop from near his ears back into ordinary life. He took off his hat and coat and hung them with the practiced gesture of a marriage, and she looked him over with that small, pleased disapproval that says a man has come home the way he was expected to. "You're early," she said. "I am hungry," he answered, which did as well. She ladled and he ate, and neither of them pretended that food could not speak. When she poured him a small glass of red, he told her about the suitcase. Not the corpse yet. Corpses belonged to the quay, and they had an etiquette even in a marriage. But the case that was empty and locked and then not locked, about the smell of orange peel that had followed the morning as if someone had dragged a basket through the streets. "Orange peel," she said, amused. "We used to put it in the wash water when we were first married. You said it made the house smell like a grocer's." I stopped. She broke a piece of bread and pressed it against the edge of his plate, rescuing sauce. "People who use too much scent want you to know they are clean. People who are clean don't need you to know." He smiled without opening his mouth. On the chair beside him he had set the brown envelope with the cigarette ends. He pushed it aside with the back of his big hand, as if it were a child to be kept from the stove. "And a suitcase," he said. "Relined. A fine thread. Not what a cobbler or a locksmith would use." She wiped her fingers, and her eye went to the hem of the dishcloth in her hand. Fine thread is for clothes that pretend to be new, she said, or for pockets that aren't supposed to show. The mender on Rue des Trois Frères uses coarse cotton. He mends for men who work. If you want a seam that hides, you go to a woman who does hems for the wives who never like to admit a skirt has been turned. Where do those wives go? She gave him a look that said he knew and pretended not to. Between the prints and the hats, she said, where a woman can bring something and not have the world say she has brought something. Passage Verdot had just such little doors, milliners and menders tucked between dealers of engravings and postcards of women with bare shoulders, pretending to be ancient. It was also where Furet would be, educating himself in the art of not being in the way. He rose and kissed his wife on the cheek, which she accepted as if it were part of the same meal, and put on his coat again. At the door she stopped him briefly and flicked her fingers at the crown of his hat, turning it forward by a thumb's width. Hats should suit heads, she said. Otherwise it looks like they're planning to go somewhere else. He walked back into the light that had settled on the city, like a clean sheet laid over a lumpy mattress. At the passage, the glass roof made a softened day, and the smell was of old paper warmed by trapped air. Furet's door had the same bell as every shop there, a small tinkle that tried to be a soprano and failed. Inside were cardboard boxes with string-like veins on them, and a table with 2 chairs that had learned to be patient. Furet was taller than the bookseller by a head and younger by a decade. He had the face of a man who had been told he was clever until life had corrected the grammar. His hat, on a peg, was indeed the wrong one for him, too narrow in the brim, giving him a severity that his eyes did not defend. He stood when he saw Maigret because people who sell things stand, and then he sat again because people who sell discretion sit. "Police," he said, with a politeness that put a sheet between them. "How can I help?" "You went to the station last night," Maigret said. It was not a question. "You met a man with a suitcase." A slight hitch, barely more than a comma. "I waited," he said. "He did not come." "You waited where?" "Near the cafe on the corner," he said after a fraction. "I don't like the main hall. It makes one feel accused of travel." "You lit a cigarette," Maigret said, and watched his hands. Furet's fingers, long and with the little pale scars of paper cuts, made a small denial and then decided to agree. "I suppose I did," he said. "I don't smoke much. I once did. It's a habit that clings. I lit one and then I was watching. I let it go out." "One butt crushed straight down," Maigret said mildly. "The other twisted from an awkward hand. Caporal tobacco." Furet looked faintly offended, as if accused of buying bad wine. "They sell it at the kiosk. We aren't to smoke in the shop. The smell stays in vellum, and yet orange stays in vellum," Maigret said. He let the air between them carry the line. No emphasis. "You use oil with peel on your counters." "Everyone uses something," Furet said, then remembered to be agreeable. "Yes." "You followed the man into the alley," Maigret said. "I did not," Furet said quickly, and then slowed, the word as if it had tripped. "I walked to the corner. There was a man with a suitcase, but I couldn't see his face. He turned. I did not follow. It was late. You came back to your employer with a handkerchief. He saw blood on it." "A nosebleed," Furet said. He was ready with that, too ready. "In this season." "In this season," Maigret agreed, looking at the nostrils that were neat and unreddened. He tilted his head, as if he could hear the words that had been spoken in the alley like a faint conversation in a neighboring room. "Pas à la consigne. Discret." He let the echoes go. "Who taught you to walk like that?" he asked instead. "Heel first, then the rest. A man who learned the square at 16 and forgot at 20. "Everyone walks," Furet said, but his hand went to his knee, pressed it once as if to remind the joint of a field somewhere that had got into the bone. "I did my service. It does not matter." It matters that someone heard two men in an alley, and one of them did not belong to that street, Maigret said. He stood, and the chair made a small noise of complaint that Furet would remember more easily than words. Where were you between 11 and 1? At home by 12, Furet said. The concierge saw me. You can ask. I will, Maigret said. And I will ask which hat you wore. He left the passage and stood under the glass for a minute. There was a mender 2 doors along from the prince, a small sign, hand-painted, offering owlets, retouches, doubleurs. The woman inside had the calm of people whose work is patient. She was unhurried because thread knows no hurrying. Madame, he said, removing his hat again, do you reline cases? Sometimes, she said, surprised but equal to anything. Men bring things they're ashamed to ask a cobbler. They think a needle is a needle. A fine thread was used, he said, for a man's case. Men who do not want holes, she said. Coarse thread makes holes. Hems hide. Did a man come on Monday with a brown suitcase? She waited as if going through her drawers in her head. Yes, she said. He was kind, and he did not flirt. Which is kind. He asked if I could make the lining lie tight. It had a blister in it. He said it caught on the cloth when he opened and closed it. I told him it had not been put down straight. I redid it. He asked if I could make a little pocket there, where the hinge is. Not a pocket, she corrected herself. Exact. A place where a receipt could sit flat. He said he loses receipts. Did you? Yes. It is 2 stitches more. I'm not a thief. What did he smell of? She laughed, not unkindly. Soap and a nervous stomach. And peel. He had an orange in his coat. He peeled it while I worked and put the peel in his pocket because he was careful even with that. Thank you, he said. You have saved me time. In the arcade, he stood a moment and let the noise of footsteps pass under the glass like rain moving behind a window. The picture in his head settled. A man who did not want a pocket for a receipt. A man who wanted a place to tuck a few sheets flat as a thought. An empty suitcase that was not empty where anyone would look. Someone else who knew emptiness could be a trick if you could bear to leave it alone. At the quay, he had them bring the suitcase to his office. It looked smaller there, in the company of the stove and the window and the big desk that had learned the habits of his elbows. The clasp the locksmith had fitted gleamed with that unnecessary pride of new metal among old. He sat and lit his pipe and did not open the case at once. Instead, he watched the latch and the lining that ran around it like a second lid. Inspector Lognon came in without knocking exactly, which was his way of knocking. He had a face that had never forgiven the city for being itself. So, he said, looking at the case as if it had criticized him, a robbery turned into a tragedy. The ring gone, the watch gone, the wallet gone, an empty case. Empty, Maigret said, is a word with many uses. He did not look at Lognon. He watched the place where the woman had said she had added 2 extra stitches. Lognon sat anyway, turning his hat in his hands like a thought he did not want to think. I hear you have a bookseller, Lognon said gloomily, and an assistant with blood on his handkerchief. It will be a disappointment. They have alibis and friends who drink with them because they have no wives. The dead man will be a nobody, and the letters, if there were any, will be about nothing. People who sell letters always think no one will know what their lives amount to without paper. People who sell letters, Maigret said, sell the right not to be alone with what is in them. He set his pipe down. With his thumbnail he teased at the edge of the lining where the seam lay too close to the hinge. It lifted the slightest fraction, more the idea of lifting than the thing. He did not pull. He let it fall again and smoothed it as if it were the knee of a restless child. Have you eaten? He asked Lognon, who scowled because he had not. Go, Maigret said, but with kindness. Eat. Then go to Passage Verdoux and ask the concierge if Furet came home at midnight. If he did, ask whether it was the first time in a week he came at that hour. When men shift their time, they drag their guilt with them like a suit that doesn't fit. Lognon grunted and left, taking his weather with him. The stove ticked. Outside, the river made the same indifferent song, as if the city were a boat and all of them only passengers who had boarded at different stops. Maigret stood and lifted the case and shook it very gently once. It made no sound at all, which was itself a sound, like a drawer that should rattle because there is something small and flat in it and does not rattle because the small, flat thing is held exactly by its place. He set the case down again and leaned back, hands folded on the edge of the desk. Perhaps there were letters there, or a map, or only a man's pride stitched into linen. He would not tear it yet. Things that are meant to come loose do so when you stop insisting. He let the pipe go out. The coals shifted inside the stove with a tiny, consenting sigh, and in the silence that followed, he heard the case give a whisper of its own, the stiff sound of paper that has learned to lie still and, for the moment, intends to. He waited until the whisper in the lining no longer seemed like a trick of the stove, then rang for the lab clerk, a young man with careful hands who still treated objects as if they might forgive him for touching them. The clerk brought a tray as if serving tea. Scalpel, tweezers, little envelopes with gummed lips, a pencil that had not yet lost its point. "No tearing," Maigret said. "We are guests." The boy nodded, and at Maigret's chin tilt, set the case on its back so the hinge faced them like a stitched mouth. He slid the blade under the extra 2 stitches the seamstress had spoken of. Thread gave with a dry sigh, and then did what thread always does when asked kindly. It yielded in a straight line. The lining loosened a fraction. The boy paused, waited for permission that came in the lowering of heavy eyelids. Under the lining there was no secret compartment in the melodramatic sense. There was only a cavity that had been a cavity all along. The void between leather and cloth that someone had decided could carry a small burden. The tweezers went in and touched something that flexed like fish skin and made the faintest sound of paper colliding with paper. 1, 2, 3, flat packets, each wrapped in tissue so thin it seemed to have been breathed rather than made. Then, at the very hinge, another, narrower than the rest and stiff, as if it had once been folded and then taught never to fold again. The boy laid them onto the tray and stepped back, almost formal. Maigret did not open them at once. The stove ticked again. Outside, somewhere, a horn peeped at a cart that would not hurry. He let time walk into the room and sit down with them. He opened the top packet with his thumb on the tissue, not on the paper under it. Cream paper, a hand that had learned to be beautiful before it learned to be fast. Not a young hand. The loops were too modest for that, and the descenders knew restraint. He read without moving his lips. The words were not scandalous on their face. They were the words of a woman writing to a man called Henri, perhaps not his name, about ordinary things that had learned to carry weight, a walk, a damp path, a scarf forgotten, and returned with a pin she pretended she had not noticed. There were dates, spring 2 years ago. The days perched neatly on the right, and a location sometimes etched in small capitals. Haussmann, 94 on one. Nice, Continental, on another. He closed that packet and opened the next. The same hand. Later. A more careful tone. She wrote of the arguments that make us dizzy, of promises we will not hold you to, of a day when the cough was worse, and the words had a way of making their own shadows. Once, toward the end, there was a phrase underlined not for emphasis, but because the pen had been pressed there while the writer thought, if the letters must not be, burn them with something that smells stronger. Then, in parenthesis, almost prim, I know you will not. The narrow packet at the hinge was different. Not letters, but a receipt in a clerk's hand. No sentiment in it. Received from M.J. Martin the sum of, for work done at M&S, Barbès. The letters M and S, the dash, like the place where a secret had been invited and had shown up early. A second slip. An appointment card from the shop on Rue Lafayette. Documents appraised, discretion assured, a time written in pencil and then rubbed out and written again. Last night's. On the tissue paper, the faintest crescent of scent lingered. Powder, not orange. Violets, or something that pretended to be them, the sort of perfume that stayed in the necks of scarves. He did not glance at Lognon's empty chair to make a remark he would have made if Lognon had been there. He put the packets back as he had found them, tissue smoothing over them like a nurse's hand over a sheet. He did not ask the boy to restitch the seam. He folded the lining back into place and closed the case, not with a click, but with the soft little kiss by which a well-oiled clasp acknowledges its duty. "Thank you," he said to the boy, who left pleased by the way the room had treated him, and by an old man's quiet "Merci, mon petit," that made him feel a little less like a pair of hands and more like a person who might grow into the habit of silence. The telephone rang once and then again, as if it had changed its mind and come back. It was Lognon, his voice even more disenchanted when he had good news. "Concierge says Furet came home at 12:30, he said, but that was later than his usual, and he looked taller. Her joke, not mine. He held his head higher. Men who have done something, she says, always do. I told her men who have done nothing also do when they want to. And this week? 2 nights at 11, 1 at midnight. Last night latest. He went up alone. She did not see blood. She would not see a dragon if it paid rent. Thank you." He hung up and looked at the closed case. There are moments, he knew, when it is easy to tidy a case with an arrest. It would not be wrong to carry the case to the passage and let the assistant warm his hands at the heat of his own fear. It would make the report simpler. But the letters had been written by a hand that seemed to have believed that words, once put down, were a kind of shelter. That was not a legal notion, but it was a human one, and Maigret felt it like a stone in his shoe. He did not want to remove too soon for fear of forgetting it had been there. He called Janvier, who had a way with clerks. "The firm marked M&S near Barbès," he said. "Find it, quietly. Ask no questions at first. Look at the letterhead, the lamps, the dust. See if something in the rooms tells you whether a man could have kept a little aside without being noticed." "And Martin?" Janvier asked. "Ask at the registry if there is a Jules Martin who used to be there and is not now," Maigret said. "There will be 3. Choose the one who had handsome shirts once and wore them too long." He rang off and sat again, and for a few minutes he did nothing but watch the case the way one watches a sleeping child, alert to the stir that will mean it has woken and will want something. The stove relaxed. A fly, fooled by the warmth as if by a late spring, tapped the window with the insistence of someone who had mistaken glass for air and was taking the discovery personally. In the corridor, footsteps came and stopped where they often did, and then the hesitant knock that was not a knock but a permission to open that would be granted only if one did not ask. The girl from the cafe stood there, damp hair curled by the weather, the same ridges under the eyes that come from waking early 2 days in a row. She carried her coat over her arm, though it was not so warm as that, and the coat was damp at the hem. "I shouldn't be here," she said without preface, "but if you come in, you might forget to come back out." He smiled a little at the inversion. "I come and go," he said. "Sit. What have you remembered?" "It's not a remembering," she said, perching on the chair as if it might bite. "It's that the man who stood at the corner last night, the tall one with the hat, he came this morning, when I was opening. He asked for water. He didn't drink it. He put a coin on the counter and he said, 'You work very late,' which meant, 'You saw something.' I said nothing. He smiled like a man who doesn't mind waiting for yes. Then he went. When he left, he touched the door with his handkerchief. 'Here.' She mimed it, a flourish disguised as wiping. He didn't want to leave prints, my brother says. He was in the army. He knows these tricks, but he did it like a man who had been told how, not like a man who had done it all his life. And why tell me now? Because he will come again, she said simply. He thinks if you do the same thing twice, you own the street. He will come tonight, maybe. I can watch the corner from my little window in the back. It sees the alley like an eye through a keyhole. If you came, you could see him the way I do." "You are not afraid," Maigret said. Not a compliment and not a warning either. She lifted her chin. "We own very little," she said. "We own what we see. If I give it to you, at least I have done something with it." "Tell me about his hands," he said. When witnesses were tired of faces, hands still told the truth. "Clean," she said, "not a worker's." But the nails. There was ink there, under the nail of the ring finger, as if he had dipped and not quite wiped. A clerk, maybe. And he wears his watch too tight. In winter you can see where the skin is pale. He filed it away among the small facts that sit quietly until one of them makes a noise. "You will be careful," he said, "and you will not play at being the police." She nodded, and when she stood, she left a little warmth on the chair, as if chairs could keep such things the way shirts keep faint perfume. At the door, she turned. "The man with the suitcase," she said. "He said mercy for the water, as if he were thanking someone for not seeing him. I thought that was sad. I wanted to tell you." When she had gone, he opened the window and let the river air pull through. It carried damp and coal and a pastry sweetness from somewhere upriver where ovens worked to get ahead of evening. He thought of the letters, and of a woman who could write sentences that were both modest and brave. He thought of the assistant who walked like a man who had borrowed his gait from a parade and then forgotten to give it back. He thought of the bookseller who sold discretion as if it were a commodity that did not spoil, and of Martin, who had been careful enough to ask a seamstress for 2 extra stitches and not careful enough to keep to the main streets. The telephone rang again. This time it was Janvier, cheerful even when he had been sent to look at dust. "M&S is Mignot and Sorel," he said. "Stationers. A warehouse near Barbès, retail on Boulevard de Rochechouart. They keep private ledgers for clients who don't want envelopes to go astray. It's a kind of vault with paper walls. Your man Martin worked there until a year ago. A stroke, they say. Not a stroke. How do you call it? A scare that makes the doctor say, 'No more stairs.' They let him go. The director speaks of him with respect and a pinch of contempt, too honest for his own good. They say he minded the back room where special clients kept boxes, clients with names that begin with "do" and end with money. He could have seen anything. He could have seen everything. And now? Maigret asked. And now, Janvier said, a ledger is missing a notation from 2 years ago, a box that belonged to the Comtesse de L. It's been quiet. Quiet is loud in such places. The director looked at the hole on the shelf as if it were a missing tooth. "Good," Maigret said. He meant it in the way he always did, not as praise for a fact, but as acknowledgement that the fabric had taken a stitch. "Go to the director. Tell him nothing. Ask to see the Comtesse's invoices for cleaning, for fumigation if there was any, for anything that might have required opening the box. If he asks why, tell him the police are curious about orange oil." He replaced the receiver and checked his watch. In the case of a man found in an alley, time is not a rope that pulls you forward. It is a sheet you lift and look under. He put on his coat and took the case by the handle. It had a gravity now, not from weight, but from having declared itself to be something. At the door he paused and, on a whim that was not a whim, called Madame. Roussel. She came to the telephone with the quickness of women who live near it. "Madame," he said, "if a gentleman should come to Martin's room asking for him, you will not be brave. You will be ordinary. You will say he is at the station cafe at 6, and then you will send your nephew to the corner to tell us you have been ordinary." "You will be there?" she asked, needing the talisman. "I'm often where coffee is," he said, and she laughed, which made him feel more responsible for her than for the plan. He went out into the cold that was not really cold, but a lingering damp that made wool heavy. As he walked toward the station again, he imagined the alley as the girl with the window would see it, a strip of world framed by boxes and bottles and the edge of a zinc counter, a place where men became taller or shorter depending on whether they knew where they were going. He did not intend to arrest anyone tonight. He intended only to watch men carry what they could, an empty case, a lie, a memory, and see which of them would set it down first. Evening drifted down over the station without deciding what it meant to be. Neither night nor day, only the color the city wears when it does not wish to be looked at closely. The iron ribs of the hall turned the last light into narrow lanes, and the damp along the boulevard offered everything a second reflection. The cafe girl had lit 2 lamps, one for the counter and one for the back, and left the door a hand's breadth open as if to breathe. Maigret took a table near the window that could see both the corner and the first mouth of the alley by glancing sideways. He set the suitcase under the table and then, after a moment, slid it out so that the corner of it showed, exactly the way a man who feared forgetting would keep a thing within touch of his shoe. He asked for beer and received coffee, the girl's decision, not his error. She moved without fuss, the way people do when they have elected to be brave and would rather not admire themselves for it. Outside, the baker leaned for his smoke and made an effort at not seeming to look. On the far side of the street, Darnoux became a man buying matches, and then a man who could not get his lighter to work. Farther off, as if gloom had registered a change of address, Lognon materialized, hands in coat pockets so deep that it looked like he had been sewn into them. He disliked stakeouts. They confirmed what he already knew about people. 10 minutes to 6, a boy of 13 in a knitted cap came loping along, serious with duty and warmth in his cheeks, as if cold sharpened the pleasure of running. He put his hands on the counter as if it were a starting block. "Madame Roussel says to tell you, a gentleman asked for Monsieur Martin like he owned him," he recited. "She told him station cafe at 6 like you said. He said naturally in a voice that didn't sound natural. Tall, dark hat, gloves like skin." "Good," Maigret said, and the boy took the word like bread, tucked it into himself, and vanished. The station clock, imperturbable, moved its minute hand a notch that everyone noticed without admitting it. The first to enter was not tall. He had the careful neutrality of men who are paid to be less than themselves. Grey suit, sober tie, the exact shoes you cannot remember after you have seen them. He took a stool and ordered Vichy water as if it were an oath. When the glass came, he sniffed it as if to ensure it had kept its promises. His hands were dry, the nails half-mooned with cleanliness. When he removed his gloves, the right wrist showed a fine bracelet of paler skin, a watch worn tight. He did not look at the suitcase. He looked at the door and at the girl, and then he looked at his own reflection in the window as if rehearsing a reply. At 6 precisely, as if he had synchronized himself to prove a point, the assistant arrived. Furet's hat wrong for his head, his coat 1 grade too smart for his means, his eyes eager to be forgiven for being where they were. He paused to light a cigarette and let it die without ever having entered his mouth. The caporal smell came thinly, an echo of the morning. He did not go straight to the counter. He stood in the doorway long enough for the first man to decide he had not seen him, then came to stand 2 stools away. The girl put a glass down. "Water," she said, as if reminding him of a habit he had claimed. He put a coin on the zinc, and, with the same little flourish the girl had mimed earlier, wiped his fingers along the door-post as he turned, a gesture that contained more theatre than science. The 2 men pretended not to see each other for the length of a sigh, then exchanged the kind of glance used by people who have spoken often with their eyes and rarely with their mouths. The older of the 2? Yes, older after all, by the way he kept his shoulders level when moving his head, tilted his chin toward the street. Furet nodded almost imperceptibly, grateful to be told what to do by someone who would also be responsible for it. They left a spill of small coins on the counter like breadcrumbs, and walked out with the choreography of men who learn to move. In corridors. "Stay," Maigret told the girl, not because she had stirred, but because he felt her will stretch after them. He stood, his chair making the faintest sound, and crossed the room with a slowness that was its own kind of speed. Outside, the air had cooled enough to put a tiny crust on the puddles. His breath made a private cloud. The alley received them like a mouth swallowing a word. There were the cats and the bins and the scuffed wall that knew its part. The men went 3 paces in, far enough to be seen only as shapes from the street, and turned to face one another with that formal politeness used when the stakes are too high for anyone to admit there are stakes. The older man spoke first. His voice had the varnish that comes from being used in rooms where other people sit. "You have made yourself clumsy," he said, not angry, only exact. "I asked for discretion, and you chose this." "I waited," Furet said. His own voice was thinner and more obedient than in the shop. He turned. He wanted everything at once. He kept his hand on the case. He would not. He spoke nonsense about a cloakroom. "I thought he was taking me somewhere else. I didn't follow. You only tried to hurry him," the man said, as if the words had been prepared. "And he fell." Men who are too honest fall unexpectedly. Furet's face did something brief. Fury at how small he looked to the other man, and then the quick patch of wanting to be looked after. "I did not strike him," he said, and believed it. "I reached, and he went down," the older man finished almost gently. "The back of the head is an unprotected place. That is why we keep hats. It is why we do not do this sort of work ourselves." "You sent me," Furet said, and that was the tremor in the music. "I sent you to say no," the man corrected, and now there was a thread of impatience, like a hairline on crystal. "No name, no station, no sale. I did not send you to improvise." Maigret stepped into the little space between them the way a stove makes itself known in a cold room, without surprise and without apology. "Gentlemen," he said. His hat seemed suddenly too simple for his head. He lifted it a fraction to bring it into line. "You have found a poor place for business." The older man's gaze landed on him with the recognition of someone who has had dealings with the police and arranged them to his taste. "Chief Inspector," he said, "I am Maître Vernier. I practice law for people who prefer not to be clients." "Good evening, Maître," Maigret said. He kept his voice at the level where one talks to a sleeping dog. "Your client keeps memories in boxes and hires men to say no at station cafes." "Your phrasing is picturesque," Vernier said. "My client keeps papers in a place where paper is stored. 2 years ago, something was mislaid. When the clerk left his employment, it was thought he might understand where the mislaying had occurred. I agreed to speak with him. That is all." "Your assistant speaks with his hands," Maigret said. "The clerk is now dead, and yet I do not see you alarmed." Vernier's eyes did the small thing eyes do when a man has not expected to be required to feel. "If there has been an incident, of course we will place ourselves at your disposal. Discretion does not extend to manslaughter." "Discretion rarely extends as far as people hope," Maigret said. He looked at Furet, not unkindly. "If you had not followed, he might have gone home and locked his case and woken tomorrow a little poorer and a little more resigned. He would have gone to a woman and said, 'I did not sell them after all.' Instead, a wall did the work for you." Furet swallowed. He had already emptied the case," he said quickly, as if to rescue his own story from drowning. "He opened it for me. There was nothing. He smiled, like he had hidden the world and he was proud to be its only cartographer." "And so you thought the map was in his pocket," Maigret said. He said it without accusation. It was the sort of thought any man has when confronted with an empty place that ought not to be empty. Vernier made a small sound, the kind chair legs make on waxed floors. "This is not a conversation for the open air," he said. "Come to my office. We will draw up an account." "The river draws better," Maigret said. "But we will talk. Not tonight. Tonight you will make sure your names are spelled correctly. In the morning you will bring your client's consent to speak. Do you understand the kind of consent I mean?" "I do," Vernier said, dry. You mean we will not pretend there are more people than there are? Maigret nodded once. And you, he said to Furet, will go home by the route you know and not by the one you think I do not know. You will sleep badly and you will keep reaching for a handkerchief that is at the laundress because you could not remove the stain. In the morning, you will come when I send for you, and you will tell me the part you have left out, whose idea it was to meet in an alley. It was not yours. Furet's mouth opened and closed like a boy's who has been told he is not yet guilty enough to flee. Yes, he said. He looked at Vernier, who did not lower his eyes. Men like him do not, but neither did he offer shelter. They would have gone then, with their thoughts for company, but the alley had one more small thing to say. Footsteps, light and cautious, the sound of a cage on a string being set down, and the woman at the window appeared at her door with a bucket in her hand. She saw the three men, and she did not start. She narrowed her eyes until they became the kind that see what is not offered. Madame, Vernier said, too much silk. Pardon. She did not answer him. She looked at Maigret. I would not sweep here tonight, she said, and her voice was soft with opinion. Things stick to the broom. When she had retreated, Maigret felt the small weight of her sentence settle on the others more than on him. He stood aside. Go, he said. If you try to tidy anything before morning, you will trip on a thread. Better to step over it with both feet. Back in the cafe, the girl poured coffee without asking who wanted it. Her hands were very steady now, the way hands are after fear discovers it has not been invited to stay. Through the window, the station showed its night face, clocks honest in their circles, a porter stifling a yawn that had been coming on all afternoon. Who was he? She asked, not for gossip, for the arithmetic. A man who makes things legal that were already decided, Maigret said, and a man who does what he's told and then admits to himself that he added something of his own. The one with the wrong hat, she said. The hat will be changed tomorrow, he said, and that seemed to please her. She smiled and then looked sad. The other one, the one with the case. He said, merci for water, she murmured, as if giving the city back something small and valuable. I keep thinking about that. Outside, Lognon drifted in the rain's memory, attending to nothing and everything. On the boulevard, Darnoux was talking to the baker, who had come to the conclusion that dough rises more slowly if you watch it. The smell of orange peel, summoned by the talk, seemed fainter now, as if someone had closed a box. Maigret took his cup in both hands and let it warm the wide shelf of his palms. It was not over. It had only stopped hurrying. When he left, he did not take the alley. He walked along the busy edge of the station, where even secrets crossed with the crowd to feel less alone. The suitcase's handle lay against his fingers like a question he had decided not to answer tonight. Tomorrow would bring papers folded flat and names said aloud, and a woman, perhaps, who would come to ask what had become of a man who used to bring his shirts back smelling of orange and pride. For now, it was enough to follow the slow breath of the city and to know that the truth, like any patient creature, would come if you did not frighten it by running. Morning arrived without weather, a kind of grey that made the city seem undecided about being seen. Maigret woke earlier than the clock would have required and lay a minute listening to the apartment's small declarations, a pipe settling, a neighbour's step above, the faint complaint of the wardrobe door that needed oil and had been promised it for 2 winters. In the kitchen, steam blurred the window and made the world beyond look like a photograph not yet fixed. His wife had put coffee on, and he folded yesterday's newspaper so that it opened where she thought he would want it. The habit had become a kind of quiet conversation between them. He sat, and the chair recognized him. She set the cup down, then paused, nose lifting a little. "You smell of violets," she said. He glanced at his sleeve out of habit, as if scent could stain like dust. "The case," he said. She buttered bread with a pressure that kept the knife from tearing. Not the cheap kind, the powder that keeps to scarves and drawers. My aunt used it. She said it made the air polite. She raised her eyes. Violets are for women who want their secrets to seem kind. He nodded. The letters had carried that breath. He had thought of the orange oil because it had followed him like a messenger with simple news. The violets were another messenger, less eager, more exact. He broke his bread and let it soak a moment in the coffee until it threatened to give up, and then saved it just before. The man coughed, she added, as if they had left the talk and come back to it while he finished chewing. The girl said so. Your paper last night smelled of violets and mentioned a cough. You said the writer spoke of one worse day. If the letters are to him, not about him, then they are his. He smiled at the word she had chosen. To him, not for him. The difference mattered. He put his big hand over hers for a second, and she pretended to be surprised. At the quay, the corridor had its own morning routine. Brooms, the rubbery squeak of a bucket, an exchange of jokes already faded. Lognon looked like a man who had changed his mind about shaving halfway through and decided to let the stubble argue with his mood. Vernier at 10, he said, barely concealing his dislike of men whose pockets had linings. Before that, Janvier, Maigret said. The younger man came in with cold still blooming on his cheeks and a notebook that had not yet learned to be sloppy. Mignot and Sorel keep a private annex for certain clients, he reported. Each box has its ledger notation. 2 years ago, the Comtesse's entry is rubbed to nothing, but the tracing paper under it kept the indentations. Someone has been careful, but not enough. The date matches one of your letters. The foreman says the Comtesse's maid sometimes sent the box for airing, their word. Then it came back smelling of peel. He says the old director, the one before, used to boast their place was cleaner than a church. And our man? Martin, Jules sometimes, Henri elsewhere, worked that room, Janvier said. He was respected and invisible. One of those men who only exist when the keys are needed and disappear when the papers are put away. The new director says Martin had delicacy in the old sense. He means discretion he couldn't afford. Maigret lit his pipe and let the first drawer go without keeping it. And the Comtesse. She received callers only by card and only after noon. The porter thinks her nephew manages most things. The nephew is fond of the word prudence. Prudence walks in circles when it's worried, Maigret said. Thank you. At 10, the clerk from Vernier's office came like a preview, gloves in his pocket, hat brushed too sharply, then the lawyer himself, whose smile arrived before he did and waited on the doorstep. He took the chair without being asked the way men do when sitting is part of their argument. My client wishes to cooperate, he said. She is distressed to hear of an accident involving a former servant of a firm with which she has had long and respectful dealings. Distressed, Maigret repeated, agreeing to the word and making it do work. We are speaking of the Comtesse. Vernier's hands did nothing. That was their trick. It is better not to write names, he said mildly. We will not, Maigret said, but we will say them aloud. 2 years ago, her box was opened for airing. Letters were removed. By whom is the question we are pretending to pose. A former clerk kept them. He did not sell them, though he tried. Last night he came to sell them all at once and did not leave the alley. Your assistant is poor at not following, and your client sent you because she knows paper lives longer than pride. Vernier tapped a finger once on his knee. She sent me because she is ill, he said, and because it is a cruelty to ask old women to burn their own handwriting. The sentence hung in the room by its own hook, nothing to do with law. The pipe went out in Maigret's hand, and he did not relight it. You will take me to her, he said. If she wishes to bring the nephew, he may sit and count the syllables. The Comtesse's building had a courtyard that had learned silence, leaves from a tree not ready to be bare, yet collected in a corner where a broom had promised to visit and not returned. The porter looked as if he loved the sound of his own name spoken by the right mouth and was prepared to deny everything else entry. Vernier's card moved him 2 degrees. Inside, heavy curtains tried to tell the morning it had come to the wrong address. The room was lined with books that had not been read in a long time but had been dusted as if to reward them for staying. The scent of violets did not come from the Comtesse herself, so much as from the air near her, the way certain women bring a weather with them. She was smaller than the chair meant her to be, with hands that had been taught when young to sit folded and had decided to keep the lesson. "My dear maître," she said to Vernier first, "gratitude as form." Then she turned to Maigret and let her eyes measure his capacity for harm. "You have my attention," she said, giving him what she did not owe. He did not speak at once. He had found that certain rooms were improved by not being in a hurry. He looked at a photograph on a side table, a man in uniform from a war with better tailoring, his expression both proud and resigned. A scarf lay coiled beside it, faint powder dust at its fold. "A man is dead," he said. "We do not come to you for gossip. We come because the dead man carried letters that smell of your scarf." The nephew arrived with the speed of words that have been kept close. Thin, exact, a tie that chose the knot for him. "Chief Inspector," he said, already defending a position no one had attacked. "My aunt has always conducted herself." "Stop," she said without looking at him. He stopped. She returned to Maigret. "There are women," she said, "who confuse affection with the comfort of being admired. I am not one of them. It was not vanity, it was inventory. I like to write. I wrote better than I spoke. The clerk at Mignot and Sorel, "Martin," Maigret said. "Sometimes Jules, sometimes Henri." She folded the name into herself without letting it show on her face. He was patient with me. He had the manner of a man who does not wish to hurry anyone again as long as he lives. He never spoke out of turn. I would send the box. He would bring it. He would wait while I looked at papers that did not need looking at. We learned to use the same words in the same order. I told him of the weather in Nice. He told me nothing about himself, which is how poor men are, out of kindness. I wrote to him when I could not sleep as well as before. He answered 3 times, perhaps 4, always the shortest sentences, and never with his name. He did not want mine. "And the letters," Maigret said. "I asked him to burn them," she said evenly. "He would not. I suppose he liked them. It is not a fault to like what is addressed to you. When I understood I could not make him burn them, I asked Maître Vernier to arrange for them to not be found. I did not want to live with the knowledge of them having become someone else's entertainment." The nephew drew the edge of his cuff down a fractional amount, the way men do when they cannot adjust the conversation to their measure. "The potential for scandal," he murmured, "was not negligible." "Scandal," she said, and there was contempt now, not for the idea, but for its tone. At my age, I could wear scandal as a shawl if it were warm. Her eyes moved past Maigret's shoulder, then returned. The movement had not been for effect. Was he hurt beyond the one place?" she asked, and that was the only time her voice mislaid its grammar. "The back of the head," Maigret said. "He fell. A man reached to keep him from closing something, and he fell. It is not grander than that." "Nothing is," she said, and let out a breath that seemed to have been on hold since a season in which violets were easier to find. "You have the letters?" He did not answer that directly. "I have the suitcase," he said. It had learned a trick. She nodded once, like someone acknowledging a good translation. "Then you will do what is right," she said. It was not a command. It was a memory of how things used to be arranged when people knew how to arrange them. "Right," the nephew repeated, as if tasting a word he had not ordered. "There is also the question of the law." "There is," Maigret said. "It says that when a man dies, those who hurried him must explain themselves. Your lawyer's assistant will come and do so. He will tell the truth, and he will be small for a while. and then he will become the right size again or not. It says also that property is what we can prove and what we can bear. We will decide which this is." He stood because it was time to, and the Comtesse did not rise. She had already done her part. At the door, she said, not looking at Vernier, "I would like the scarf back when they have finished with it." He glanced at the scarf, genuinely surprised, perhaps, to see it where it was. "It is not evidence," she added. "It is age." On the pavement outside, the nephew's impatience tried to keep step with Vernier's diplomacy, and failed. "You will not make a case of this," he said to Maigret, in a way that was not a threat exactly, but a suggestion that the world be tidy. "I will not make a spectacle," Maigret said. "Cases make themselves." He walked back toward the river, letting the city loosen its jaw around him. At the quai, Janvier had left another note on his desk in a hand that tried to be unnoticeable. Bookseller called. Furet came in early. He wishes to correct his memory. Under that, in different pencil, a line from the concierge at Passage Verdot. He washed his handkerchief himself in the sink on the landing. Men who do that have done something they should not have done. He sent for Furet and did not pace while he waited. The suitcase sat where it had sat, modest as furniture. When Furet came, he had that look men have who have not slept and have remembered too often what they forgot. He stood, then sat when told, then stood again to remove his wrong hat and chose to stay on his feet, as if distance from the chair would keep him from sinking. "I should have said," he began without preface, "that I followed him. I did not touch him. I caught the case when it opened. He held to it. I held to it because I thought if I did not, it would spill." He drew back and went against the wall. I heard the sound. I did not see his head. Maigret watched his hands. They were making slow circles in the air, as if smoothing a cloth on a table before laying out a meal no one would eat. "You wiped the door with your handkerchief," he said, not accusing, just adding a picture to a list. "I read it in a book," Furet said miserably. "It seemed the sort of thing someone should do when things have happened. I was a fool." "Fools," Maigret said, "take advice from paper. You sell paper. It is a professional risk. You will sign a statement. It will not be generous to you, but it will not be cruel." Furet nodded, eyes wet with the sort of tears that do not intend to fall, and therefore do not. "And the letters?" "They are not for you," Maigret said. "They are not for anyone who would buy them. They belong, for a little longer, to someone who writes better than she sleeps." When Furet had gone with a sergeant who would draw his words out gently like thread from a tangle, Maigret opened the window again. The river's smell came in with the cold, a good smell because it told the truth about water and stone and the business between them. He took the suitcase and set it on the floor beside the stove, like a guest who would be kept warm without being entertained. On the sill, a faint crescent of violet lingered from his sleeve where it had rested a moment. He rubbed it with his thumb and let it remain. There are scents that will leave when they are ready. He thought of the woman's hands, of the ways she had looked past him once, perhaps toward a time when she had written quickly without counting the costs. He thought of Martin, Henri, who had guarded emptiness like a virtue and hidden fullness where no one would think to press. By evening, a draft of the statement lay on his desk, and a message from Janvier that the director at Mignot and Sorel had found an old receipt bearing the clerk's careful hand, acknowledging restoration of a box's contents after airing. The word again, a neat circle. He did not hurry to end it. He was not yet at the point where endings begin. He put on his coat and walked out into the early dark, carrying nothing for once, and watched his breath go ahead of him like an envoy to the night. The city had put its lamps on and drawn its curtains, but had not gone to sleep. He passed the cafe. The girl lifted her chin at him in that way of women who have decided to keep the world company a little longer. He did not go in. He let the station's windows hold his reflection for a step and then let it go. There would be, soon enough, ink and stamps, and a clerk who would write a name with care. For now, there was the slow luxury of knowing where the truth sat, and the courtesy to let it choose its moment to speak. Furet wrote slowly, not because he was careful with words, but because his hand had learned to stop at the end of each line and consider whether it wanted to go on. The sergeant sat beside him, reading with the habit of someone who measures not only sentences, but silences. In the corner, the stove held its heat as if it had been told it would be needed later. Maigret watched from his desk, not leaning forward. He had found that confessions were quicker when no one looked like they were waiting. "I should have said," Furet murmured at last, without looking up, "that I went on Sunday to his room. Madame Roussel sent me away twice, but I told her I sold books to quiet men, and she let me wait at the foot of the stairs. He came down with his hat in his hands. He did not put it on in the hall. Men who are proud don't. I asked if we could speak." He stopped to spell speak neatly and then went on. "He said he would not sell to me. He wanted a man with a proper shop, not assistants. I told him I spoke for my employer. He said that was worse because employers were not the ones who came when things went wrong." He placed the pencil and looked at it the way one looks at a tool that has not behaved. "I did not touch him," he said again, as if repetition were proof. "Last night, I took the case when he loosened his hand to turn and say something, and he went back. He had that cough, and it surprised him. The wall did the rest." His mouth flattened. "I wiped the door because I did not know what men do in such moments. I'd read a book that said—" He let the sentence fail, ashamed of the paper that had betrayed him. "You will sign," the sergeant said gently, and the signature came, more like a schoolboy's than before, as if the man in him had stepped aside for the boy to do the frightened part. When he had gone, Janvier slid in on the draft that followed him through doors. He had a way of arriving with news that did not dim the room. "Mignot and Sorel's old director died last winter," he said, "and the new one is tidying sins that were already dust." He let me see a ledger he said did not exist. The Comtesse's box was taken to air in the spring 2 years ago. There's a notation, erased, but the pressure marks stayed in the tissue under the page. Someone put it back the same evening. The foreman says Martin insisted on bringing it himself. He trusted no one for that job. "And the assistant?" Maigret asked. "Has put his name on paper. A better hand than his story," Janvier said. "Also, there was a paper in Martin's room we didn't see the first time. It had slipped under the skirting. A bill from a little doctor near the markets. For syrups and an examination. A note, pay when able, and a pawn ticket for a watch. He owed no one else." The smallness of it made the room seem too large. A man had taken the letters to the bookshop not to sell a scandal, but to add to a sum written in a careful column. Doctor, rent, laundry, a coin left for the girl for water so as not to owe even that. The empty suitcase had been a way of keeping the world from knowing he still owned anything. "Madame Roussel," Maigret said. "Tell her we will come by this afternoon. She has something else she kept back because it was not a fact but a thought." Janvier smiled, knowing the type. "She always has one more thought." He went, and the day began to arrange itself around noon. Vernier telephoned to say he was at his office when the police wished to be reassured by furniture. The nephew left a message written by someone else's hand and signed with his own. Neat, impatient. "We hope to resolve this with dignity." Dignity, Maigret thought, was often what people requested when they meant speed. He took his coat and the suitcase and went to Rue Philippe de Girard. The stair was the same, smelling of damp paste and onion steam and the faint acidity of a life lived well within its means. Madame Roussel had ironed a cloth and laid it on the little table since they had last come. Acts of respect are sometimes made toward men who are no longer there. She had set a glass of water because she thought the police drank water in the afternoon, and when he asked for coffee, she pretended to be pleased to have an excuse. "It was this," she said, and opened a drawer where she kept buttons that did not fit anything and letters that were not hers. She produced an envelope addressed in a hand that was not the Comtesse's, the same neat clerk's hand as the warehouse receipt. Inside was a single page. "Madame," it said, "you should not send flowers." The concierge gossip. "I'm a man who likes silence. If you wish to send anything, send paper. I will return some of it to you when it has less need to be white." It was signed simply H. The date lay 2 summers behind. "He would not show me," she said, proud to have resisted curiosity. But the draft under his blotter had the words. "I saw them when I wiped. I didn't like to keep it, but I thought perhaps you should know he was a man who put the world into good order, not a thief." "Thank you," Maigret said. "He was not a thief." She nodded, satisfied to have conditioned the world as much as she could. On the way back, he let the streets decide his path, which is to say, he did not decide, and the city took him where he would have gone anyway. By chance, or by the habit of his feet, he found himself again under the glass of Passage Verdeux. The mender looked up from her work and smiled with her eyes, which did not require the mouth to agree. The bookseller pretended not to see him, and the pretense was so well executed that it did not need to be tested. At Vernier's, the air was touched faintly by a cologne that preferred to be remembered rather than noticed. The lawyer stood at a window with a view of a courtyard designed to make men think clearly. He turned, composed as before, but the note he had practiced had softened by a fraction. "We are prepared to make statements," he said, which, in his mouth, meant they would say what could be checked and would not invent the rest. "You sent your assistant to say no," Maigret said. "He said something else. He put his hand where it ought not to have gone. A man fell." "Yes," Vernier said simply. He did not proffer adjectives. "I did not instruct him to pursue. I told him not to invite the man to the light. I told him to wait where people did not listen. He chose the corner of a street that looks like a room. That is a lawyer's fault," he added with a dryness turned inward. "We make phrases into places." "The letters," Maigret said, "will not be sold. They will not be read in cafes or printed by men who cannot put their names under them without ink that stains. They will not be burned by anyone who wants the smell of it. Do you understand?" "I think so," Vernier said. "You will remember that I have a client." "I do," Maigret said. "She has more courage than her nephew deserves. She asked a man to burn something, and he could not. That is the whole tragedy. The rest is bookkeeping." Vernier looked out at the careful courtyard. "What will you do?" "I will keep them," Maigret said. "For a time." "Then I will take them back to the box that pretended to be air. The police sometimes guard the right to forget. It is not in any code." When he left, he did not return immediately to the quay. He went instead to the river and walked along it until he could decide to stop without feeling that he had failed to arrive. He leaned on the parapet and watched a barge move with the grain of the water. The suitcase handle warmed under his palm. There was something almost comic in the idea that leather and linen and a little clasp could have altered the path of 4 lives and the schedules of 2 offices, but comedy is only tragedy with the lights wrong. Back at his desk, the Comtesse's scarf lay where he had left it to lose a little of itself to the room. He called Vernier and told him to send a boy. When the boy came, a serious creature with shoes that had been explained to him, Maigret gave him the scarf folded in brown paper. "Tell Madame," he said, "that things have slept as they should." The boy nodded because he had been told not to ask and left with relief equal to his responsibility. The telephone, which had been respectful all afternoon, rang. The registry had located a birth entry for Henri Jules Martin, son of a seamstress, born in a village whose name the clerk pronounced in a way that made it sound smaller than it was. The lodging ledger at Roussel's would now match a name to a body. The city does these things for the dead, as if it were a homemaker folding clothes no one will wear again. It is not kindness, it is tidiness, and sometimes that is kinder. Evening began to collect in the corners. The girl from the cafe stood in his doorway, as if brought by the same draught as the dusk. She did not come in. He "He came again," she said. "The tall one, the older. He didn't look at the door this time. He drank the water. He left no coins. I think he found his consent." She was proud of the fancy words she had overheard and saved. "Good," Maigret said. "And you?" "I have washed the doorway where the handkerchief went," she said. "2 times. It is a superstition." She hesitated, then added, "I liked the way you put the case under the table last night. Like a man who does not want to show he is holding something important, but does not want to let it forget him. It made me think of my father with his tools." He nodded once, and she left, and the corridor returned to its quieter occupation of letting people pass without keeping them. Lognon put his head in long enough to deliver a remark that could have been about weather or life. "They'll call it misadventure," he said, "and the papers will pretend not to care who it was. You and your cases with no theft worth a headline." He made to go, then paused. "You'll let the letters go back where they came from," he said, and when Maigret did not answer, he gave a shrug as close to approval as his spine would allow and disappeared again. On the desk, the statement lay with Furet's signature and the sergeant's formality under it. By tomorrow there would be stamps and the kindly lies of the legal phrases that keep things from hurting quite as much when they are written down. There would be a nephew who would send flowers as if to apologize to heir. There would be a concierge who would tell the story and improve it by removing every improvement. There would be a woman who would open a box and perhaps not look at what was inside, and a box that would go back to a shelf where dust had learned patience. He did not light his pipe. He sat with the case in reach and let night arrive the way some truths do, without spectacle, owning nothing but their own weight. When he stood at last, he left the case where it was, close to the stove, as if warmth were owed to it for having carried something so carefully. Outside, the street had drawn its curtains half shut. He buttoned his coat slowly, thinking of violets that had made the air polite and orange peel that had tried to make it clean, and of a man who had guarded emptiness because it was the only way he knew to keep what was full. He went home by a route that would pass, not by the cafe, but far enough to see its lamps as a smear of gold in the damp. From his pocket, without thinking, he touched the envelope with the cigarette butts he had taken from the alley on the first morning. He would throw them away. Not tonight. Some things were better left to finish their scent before they were let go. Morning did not so much arrive as untie itself. The city lifted its lids and found the same grey, waiting. At the quay, the corridor had the sour, sweet smell of wet wool drying, and the stove in Maigret's office produced its faithful ticking as if counting a private time. The medical report lay on his desk, a page with the dryness of men who do not mind their nouns. No bruises on the hands, no defensive marks, a fracture at the base of the skull, clean as a line drawn with a ruler, the kind made by a man's own weight traveling faster than his balance. Time of death, toward 1 in the morning. A cough noted in the chest when they opened him, old irritation, nothing dramatic, but the kind that surprises breaths at awkward moments. He read it once and put it aside. The truth had found its footing. No struggle, only that courtly violence walls do when asked to hold a man who is stepping backward through his own care. Janvier arrived with the weather still on his hair and a paper folded to the shape of his pocket. "The doctor near the markets," he said, "remembers him." Henri Jules Martin, yes. "A chest like old paper," he said. Syrups, a spoon of cod liver oil, a warning to climb slowly. He refused the hospital because he had a room, and rooms argue with hospitals. The doctor never pressed. He says the man apologized for being poor, in the way some men apologize for being tall. "Good," Maigret said softly, meaning that the world had aligned itself with what he already felt in his bones. "And the lodging ledger? Roussel has written his name as if it were a favor. She's taken to straightening his blanket in the afternoon, as if he might come back to be tidy." The telephone rang and made the room look newly official. It was the examining magistrate's secretary, The tone suggested that procedures were the furniture of life. Furet would be brought to the Palais this afternoon to repeat his statement with seals nearby. There would be a line in a file, a word like homicide involontaire, which sounded more like grammar than grief. He would go home, perhaps, while they decided how much of the future he had earned for himself. Vernier had sent a note in that clever, modest hand of his. "We submit to the process. My assistant is at your disposal. My client asks nothing but silence." "Silence is expensive," Maigret said to no one and stood. "Come," he told Janvier. "Let's take a walk where paper pretends to be air." Mignot and Sorel's warehouse near Barbès had the respectful gloom of churches and old banks. Keys made the sound of metal kissing metal. The clock with the ledger had the posture of a man who had learned to bow without changing height. The new director met them with the caution of someone who intended to write a letter after they left, whichever way the day went. They went into the annex where the special boxes lived. The air carried a bleached cleanliness, and behind it a hint of peel. An apprentice hovered at his own distance, trying to inhale the methods of discretion. The Comtesse's box sat in its niche, square, lacquered, the sort of object made to be a witness in a trial about taste. The director produced the key as if revealing a virtue and stepped back. "Allow me," Maigret said, not out of rank, but to keep the ritual from belonging to anyone else. He opened the box. Inside, bundles of paper wore their cords with the resigned neatness of uniforms. He did not read. He did not even count. He placed the 3 flat packets and the narrow one at the hinge in their old bed and felt with a finger where they might lie without pressing. The tissue made its small, dry murmur. He lowered the lid, and the air in the room consented by a fraction. "Make a notation," he said. "Not names. Words like restored and in order. Write them with the pencil you use for funerals." The director looked as if he had been handed a favor he had not known how to ask for. "Of course," he said. They left to the faint chorus of drawers closing. On the pavement, the day had decided to be damp again. They went to Rue Philippe de Girard, because some errands prefer to be done on foot. Madame Roussel met them at the door with that satisfaction proud women show when their predictions have behaved. She had polished the little mirror on the mantel until it admitted that it was a mirror. On the table, a card lay under a glass ashtray that had never seen ash. "For him," she said, "from the lady." No name, but the paper told me. A dressmaker could smell the shop. She asks if there is anything to pay for the burial. There is not. I told her the state has its plots, and our priest has a sweetness for men who are kind. But if there were, I would take it and say thank you. "Say thank you," Maigret said. "Even for what is not needed, it will make the air honest." She drew from the drawer another relic folded to fit the space. "He left this under his paper," she said. "A list. Doctor, 8 francs. Laundry, 3. Coffee for concierge, 1. Linen thread, 2. He kept his pride like a cat, sir. He fed it even when he didn't eat." She wiped her eyes without crying. "I want you to know he waited until the water boiled before he poured it over tea. Poor men learn patience from kettles." Outside, the sky spat a little. The streets caught it as if to humor it. At the Passage Verdot, Maigret stopped where the glass roof made a softened light and looked in at the mender who was coaxing a seam to admit that it had been a mistake. She glanced up and made the quick, practical smile of women who manage tears by not choosing them. The bookseller looked out with a hope he tried to fold away when he saw the police. "I brought your assistant to the truth," Maigret said at the door, not stepping in. "Bring him also to a proper hat. Men are less clumsy in their own skins." The bookseller nodded, grateful for advice that did not carry an invoice. "I will try to make a decent man," he said. "It is harder to do with paper than people think." He left him to that project and made his way to Vernier's, where the lawyer, for once, did not try to own the room with a greeting. They stood near the window, two men watching a tree decide what to do with its remaining leaves. "My client?" Vernier asked. "She will have her box," Maigret said. "She will not have her sleep, but that is age's fault, not ours." "And the assistant?" "He will be small for a while. He may grow back. He will keep to passages and read less," Maigret said. "Perhaps he will learn to walk with his weight under him." Vernier accepted this as if it had always been the bargain. "You have been kind," he said, choosing the word carefully and inspecting it before handing it over. "No," Maigret said. "We have been exact. Kindness is a luxury. Exactness is a duty." When he came back to the quay, the afternoon had already started to loosen into evening. The girl from the cafe appeared in his doorway a minute later, as regular as a train that people have stopped checking the clock for. "I brought nothing," she said. "Only a question. Does it matter in the papers that he said merci for water?" "It matters where it was said," Maigret answered. "I will keep it on my page even if the magistrate does not keep it on his." She nodded, satisfied in that stubborn way the young have when they have given something small and want it to be kept whole. Her hands were flour dry today. She had helped the baker while waiting for the hour the cafe earns its bread. "The tall one with the calm voice came again," she added. "He did not look for anything to clean. He drank coffee like a man who plans to keep being legal. He left no coins. I will forgive him for that in a week." When she had gone, Longyon came in with his look that suggested old days were made by the same bad carpenter. "The examining magistrate found his words," he said. "Manslaughter with circumstances that make the papers look bored. Your lawyer put his assistant where he can be found. The nephew sent flowers to the quay by mistake. I redirected them. They will look better in a room with curtains." "And the letters?" Longyon asked, unable to be casual enough to stop himself asking. "In a box that pretends to breathe," Maigret said. "They will outlive all of us and then turn to the color of biscuits and finally to nothing, which is the fate of decent paper." Longyon sniffed, unimpressed by philosophy, but he didn't argue with the picture. He started to go, then looked back. "You throw away those cigarette ends you hoarded?" he asked, half sneer, half inquiry about a superstition. "Tonight," Maigret said. He did not. Not yet. He sat a while with the case near the stove, the same way you sit with a guest who has told you what he came to say and now only needs company until it is not impolite to leave. He thought of the Comtesse's hands, folded not in prayer but in the habit of women who have been seen too often. He thought of Henri's list and of the doctor's bill that had been made gentle by a note. He thought of Furet's handkerchief in a basin on a landing, pink water that would have seemed like a child's drawing to the concierge. He thought of Vernier's words about cruelty and burning, and of his wife's remark over coffee. Violets are for women who want their secrets to seem kind. He took the case and walked with it to the window, then back to the stove, then opened it for the last time. The lining lay as he had left it, obedient, the extra stitches neatly replaced by the lab boy with a pride that would have surprised him if he saw it on paper. Empty, truly this time, and yet not at all, emptiness being the way certain fullnesses live politely. He shut it and let the clasp make its tiny courtesy. On his way home, he did pass by the cafe, and because it was not night yet, and because some habits are better for being indulged, he went in. The lamps gave his coat a color it did not have in daylight. A man at the end of the counter drew on a cigarette, and had the decency to finish it. The girl placed a glass of beer in front of him without asking. "You will throw away those ends," she said, catching his glance at his pocket. It was not a question. "Not here," she added. "Practical as ever. We've cleaned enough." He lifted the glass and let the first mouthful find its own way. Outside, the station breathed and the alley had nothing to say for once. When he left, he dropped the small envelope with the 2 cigarette butts into the street bin at the corner, not dramatically, not in ritual, just because he had reached the corner, and that is where bins belong. He tapped his hat into its right place and walked toward the river at the pace of a man who intends to arrive when the soup is warm. At home, the apartment had the smell of something that had been put back on the stove to be coaxed into kindness again. His wife set a plate in front of him and touched his shoulder with the same casual ceremony she used to close windows when rain began unexpectedly. "Did you finish it?" she asked. "I let it finish," he said. She nodded. That is the best way with most things. She poured a small glass of wine and then, as if remembering a detail the story needed, added, "We have violets in a drawer I never open. You can smell them sometimes when you pull a sheet. It's not a secret, it's just something that has stayed." She smiled without showing teeth. "Do you understand?" He did. He ate, and the spoon made the small, patient sounds spoons make, and the city went about its evening in the way cities do when no one insists on hurry. The case stood by the umbrella stand, one more object among objects, having learned its new life as furniture. Rain began without deciding whether to announce itself, and the window accepted it without comment. Somewhere, a clock, not his, said a quarter. He felt the day settle around him like a coat that had remembered his shoulders. 2 days later, the newspapers carried 3 lines that kept their eyes on their boots. An accident near the Gare du Nord. The police had identified the victim. An inquiry would not disturb anyone's lunch. There were no names. There never are when the city has decided it prefers digestion to knowledge. At the Palais, the examining magistrate found his phrases and set them carefully on the blotter like weights. Homicide involontaire, absence of intent, a moment's clumsiness in a place where care runs thin. Vernier stood with his chin at the angle of a lamp that throws light but does not take any, and said what was necessary without embroidery. Furet repeated his statement, voice raw with the effort of keeping it low. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked to be believed about the part where a man's hat does not help him when his heel meets a wall. The magistrate signed, and the paper took the ink as if it had been waiting for it. When it was done, Maigret walked out into an afternoon that had forgotten to choose a season and crossed the river without thinking which bridge would do. He did not go back to the quay at once. He carried the suitcase by its handle, not because it was heavy, but because the hand remembers where it met an object, and it is courteous to keep a promise even to leather. At Mignot and Sorel's annex, the clerk with the ledger gave him a nod that had learned to mean gratitude without owning the word. The box, in its niche, opened to the familiar dry whisper. The 3 flat packets and the narrow one took their places, as if a map had been rolled out underneath them. He closed the lid and stood a moment in the cool of that room where paper had invented its own weather. "In order," the director murmured over his shoulder, making the notation in pencil, each stroke straight, like thin rails for a small train. The apprentice breathed carefully so as not to blow history around. On the way to Rue Philippe de Girard, he stopped at a florist where the buckets out front pretended it was March. He asked for nothing with perfume. The girl, who had the practical face of someone who has been explained the cost of greenhouses, tied modest flowers into a small, proper thing with white thread and did not say for a funeral because her hands knew already. Madame Roussel opened her door with a dish towel in one hand and the expression of a woman who has misplaced a saucepan lid. When she saw the bouquet, she stepped aside, and a softness came into the room that the wallpaper had not expected. "From a lady," he said, and set it on the table where she had laid out his few papers like a grammar lesson. "And from the police," he added, putting an envelope under the vase. It was not large. It did not pretend to be charity. She would spend it in ways that would not offend the dead. "He has a suit," she said. "Not new, but as if it had waited for this. I'll press it again." She hesitated. "You will come?" "If I can," he said. It wasn't a promise. He knew that ceremonies do better when they are not crowded by uniforms. In the morning, a thin, undecided light. The priest from the parish spoke the words that make the ground remember what it is for. A handful of people stood back, not wanting to make a display of grief they weren't owed. Madame Roussel held her elbows as if a draught had found her and would not be persuaded to move along. Janvier stood because someone should. The gravediggers did their work with the expression of men whose work is already hard enough. There was a second bouquet, older money in its discretion, violets that kept to themselves. No card. The thread around the stems had the exact firmness of hands that had always done things correctly. Madame Roussel arranged both, approving of one and forgiving the other. On the way back to the quay, he passed through Passage Verdot because his feet carried their own sort of memory. The mender looked up and then down, satisfied that stitches had held. The bookseller lifted a hand in a salute to the sort of luck that is not luck at all. No scandal, no names, a shop that could continue to pretend it sold only history and not lives. Furet was inside, sleeves rolled, sorting papers with a care he had all along and now knew what to do with. His hat on the peg had learned its place, the brim fit his head. He did not see Maigret. That was just as well. There are faces men should not have to look into every day while they teach their hands to be ordinary again. At the quay, coffee had learned to taste like noon. Longyon came in looking as if he had spotted a flaw in the weather and blamed it personally. "Your man will get a suspended something," he reported, which was as close as he came to predicting mercy. "The lawyer will bill a nephew. The newspapers will find a dog that has learned to ride a bicycle and give it the front page." He sniffed. "You finished with your box of secrets?" "Boxes don't keep secrets," Maigret said. "People do, and then they don't, and the rest is furniture." He gestured to the suitcase leaning by the stove. "That can go to Madame Roussel. A room looks less empty if there is a thing to put under the bed." He wrote his report unhurriedly, the pen laying down lines that did not scratch. He put into it what reports permit and kept for himself 1 or 2 lines the paper had no drawer for. He said, "Merci for water," and she asked that things sleep as they should, and a woman who writes well burned nothing. When he was done, he set the pages aside until the ink had set, the way cooks let bread breathe out what it needs to. Near the end of the afternoon, Vernier presented himself without the cushion of an appointment. He carried his hat and not his smile. "I came to say," he began, and stopped, irritated at himself for not having decided on a sentence. "My assistant. He will work somewhere without corners for a time," he managed. "I told him there's a great deal of commerce that goes on in broad daylight and leaves men just as tired." "He'll learn," Maigret said. "Or he won't. He'll discover which is less work, walking well or falling well." Vernier looked at the suitcase, then at the window. "My client would like to know if there is anything the law requires of her," he said, making a point of the word requires. "Nothing," Maigret said. "She has already done the thing that weighs. She asked someone to burn what she had written, and then asked someone else to keep quiet about it, and she lived long enough to see both requests fail in a polite way. The law is satisfied." He left. The room took its old shape back from him, as rooms do when men who have practiced presence withdraw. Silence came and settled in the places it liked, on the stove side, on the window latch, on the chair backs. In the evening, the cafe was half full of the noise people make when they are exhausted by their own meals. The girl looked up as he took his usual corner and set a glass in front of him that was beer in the body and coffee in the spirit. "They came," she said, meaning the men with hats and decisions. "They left without wiping anything." "That's the best you can say of some days," he said. She put a small saucer down and, after a moment, added a slice of lemon to the rim of his glass. "For the peel," she said, not quite smiling. "Don't drop it in. It will only pretend to clean." He drank and did not drop it in, and for a while the only conversation between them was the gentle clatter of dishes arranging themselves for another morning. Outside, the alley had grown shy again and turned its face to the wall. He walked home by the part of the boulevard where the chestnuts make polite coughs in their leaves and the cobbles, even dry, look like they remember water. Upstairs, the apartment felt like a coat he knew how to hang without looking. His wife turned from the stove with the expression of someone who had been waiting long enough to enjoy chiding him and not long enough to mean it. "You're late," she said. "Everyone wanted to finish something," he said, and kissed her cheek. The soup was the sort that does not mind being warmed twice. It had acquired the pleasant stubbornness of food that has been asked to be dinner twice in a row. After they ate, he carried the suitcase down to the hall and set it beside the umbrella stand. "For Madame Roussel," he said. "Tomorrow." His wife ran a hand over the lid, smoothing it the way one smooths the back of a cat that is halfway to sleep. "It looks less empty now," she said. "It is," he said. "Emptiness learns." In the bedroom, she opened a drawer that had not been opened in a month and paused, head tilting as a small scent climbed out and stood to be noticed. "We still have the violets," she said. "I forget until they remind me." "They are good at that," he said. He lit his pipe at last, not because he needed it, but because the day asked for a seal. He stood at the window while the flame considered the tobacco and then agreed. Down in the street, a cat performed its evening patrol with the seriousness of salaried work. Somewhere a radio began to play a waltz that had learned to be modest. He felt not satisfaction, that was too big, but alignment, the sense that things had found the shelf where they would wobble less. Henri Jules Martin had taken his last backward step in an alley where men teach each other to be careful by failing at it. Furet would have a year or two in which his breath would catch when he passed doorways. The Comtesse would sleep badly and then claim she did not mind. The nephew would discover that sending flowers is not administration. The bookseller would talk his voice into a whisper again. The girl would give water in the same way. One glass, a coin left or not, a small nod as if to say, "This is the way the world remains bearable." He tapped the pipe against the ashtray his wife had bought from a man who made them sound like promises, and the ash fell with the faintest sigh. The rain, which had been considering it all day, began without flourish, as if closing a parenthesis. He let the window be. The city could wash its face without his comments. Before bed, he opened his notebook and added one line that would never appear in any official paper. He said, "Merci for water." He closed the book and set it by the lamp. In the hall, the suitcase waited for its new life as something to put under a bed. He turned out the light and lay down, listening for the stove's tick that meant the apartment had agreed to the night. The sound came, and then came sleep, which, like most truths worth having, arrived unannounced and stayed without asking for thanks.